Hello, everyone watching and listening. Good afternoon from New Delhi, this time, India. And welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast, episode number 15. This is your host, Swami Padmanabha, and I'm here today in the company of a kindred spirit and companion, deep, close companion in this bhakti pilgrimage, Krishna Chandra Prabhu. So, Krishna Chandra, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Wonderful.
So I'll share a few words on Krishna Chandra Prabhu, some brief bio that I'd like to share to introduce him to all of you, and then we will continue unpacking our conversation. So Krishna Chandra was born in 1970 in Switzerland. After becoming very politically involved, forming his own students' union schools and initiating his own newspaper, he got the inner call for a monastic life in an ashram in 1990 at 19 years old. He is the initiator of the contemplative ashram Anada dham in the mountains of Switzerland, where they have introduced silence as a crucial aspect of their daily practice. Krishna Chandra also conducts pilgrimage tours to India and has been also written hundreds of articles and almost 10 books focusing on the fine-tuning of bhakti yoga. So before I forget, I'd like to share contact info of Krishna Chandra Prabhu and his project, Ananda Dham. Here you can see the website is ananda-dham without the A at the end, dham.com. Ananda-dham.com. So in my personal case, in relation to my own personal experience with Krishna Chandra Prabhu, interestingly, I will say that our first communication, I don't know if Krishna Chandra Prabhu remembers, but once Krishna Chandra Prabhu wrote to me an email addressing me as Padmanabha Swami, which is my name, but confusing me with another Padmanabha Swami. So he thought I was another Padmanabha Swami, who is a Prabhupada disciple who accepted sannyas from Srila Narayan Maharaj. So it was interesting because that was not his official intention, was not to write to the Padmanabha Swami is talking here, but somehow the both of us took that as a providential arrangement. And that ended eventually in him inviting me very generously to his ashram, Ananda Dham in the Alps in Switzerland, where I went last year for the first time. And after a few minutes after meeting with him in person last year, I will say that immediately there was a very natural, organic connection of mutual interests and how to embrace bhakti from certain perspective, acknowledging the esoteric deep side of the tradition, but also the breadth of the tradition, the common sense in how to approach the tradition, as well as the openness to be inspired by other traditions, but other disciplines as well. So it was a very quick connection, and now personally, I'm just coming almost from my second visit to Ananda Dham a few weeks ago. Already planning my third one next year with Krishna Chandra, among other activities. So here we are today having this conversation. And as you know, our Free Radical podcast considerably revolves around the notion and the contents of my recent book on radical personalism. So Krishna Chandra always loved to invite my guests to share a few words on what does the term radical personalism mean to you, if you can enlighten us a little bit.
Thank you, Maharaj. I'm just coming out of a week of silence, so these are practically my first words. And thank you to meet you in this strange media through a screen. Like, some connection, but also some separation it evokes in the heart. But I'm very thankful also, just before I answer your question, that I have met you and that there are out there in the world devotees who reflect deeply and have the courage to for non-conformity, who have the courage to really go their own path. And when I met you and when we sat together, we had the feeling to become really truth to Gauranga and Radha and Krishna, we cannot just be encaged in some traditional way, but it needs something. And I really felt just seeing you at the airport, embracing you, really to have met a heart brother. And this doesn't mean that one has have years and years together, but it's mostly being connected through a sadhya, through a and through a vision of bhakti. So this was very precious to me. Thank you very much, Maharaj. So regarding your question, radical personalism, what a word. I think an idea which we get through the Bhagavatam is that everything in the creation is personal. So, and this obstructs ourself extremely from the tendency to depersonalize and exploit any other thing and being. We know in the Christian tradition, this extreme far away monotheism had the effect that actually nature and everything in this world became depersonalized. And so when this process was like perfected, this was the beginning of industrial revolution. Now we can just in extreme way exploit this nature. So this is everything is a being, is a person. And this means also in everything there is a own intention. And lastly, mostly because the origin of everything is personal. And this means his intention is all pervading in this world. And and to become radical personal also means not just that I enter his creation with my way of dealing, but slowly to be able to answer the intention of Thakurji, of the Lord, which has last intention. And it's a very interesting word that always fascinated me, is this Latin word absurdus, absurd, which means surdus means death. You don't hear. And up is a syllable that makes it more strong. So absurdus, absurd, means completely death. You don't hear anything. So I'm completely deaf towards the intention and the calling of the Lord. So this is, then everything becomes absurd in this world. So, but what is the opposite of absurdus? Is responsabilitas, responsibility. This means the ability to respond to an ultimate intention that is in everything. So this makes just this word and terminology, radical personalism, like a title for the whole project of spiritual life that we have for the rest of eternity. A little thought on that.
Yeah, perfect, beautiful. Thanks so much, Krishna Chandra. I was not aware of the absurdus connection. That's incredible. I really appreciate that contribution. I used in my word the word responsibility. I try every time I use the word responsibility in my book, I try to divide it with a hyphen, responsibility, because again, I felt it's so much important that we like redeem, because responsibility is such an important word, but as it is, it's important as long as it is properly understood. So so I think we need to redeem that crucial meaning of both. What is to have ability to respond to our environment, and what's the opposite of that. So thank you for further expanding my own limits or boundaries about what's radical personalism, because although we may be attempting to have the broadest possible and deepest possible conception of the term, there may be always some limitation implied, and by hearing definitions like yours, it keeps expanding ongoingly. So thank
Yeah.
you for that.
Maybe
And
we
sorry.
know that, like, in worldviews that have ultimately no personalism involved, like mechanism or monism, then actually it's a certain kind of deep sadness, like a depression. I'm like lonely here, and the only meaning that is existing is not an intention that I can respond to, but I have to make and produce a known meaning in a vast, empty ocean of nothingness. So actually, this is a very deep. It's actually a sad thing when we take personalism out of the view. Then you cannot respond on something. There is no intention. Then this means I have to create everything. It's like something quite sad and depressing.
Yeah. And it's such a burden trying to be creating something that already exists, but we are denying that it exists. So we have to constantly be making up some type of purpose to move forward, to go on somehow or other, where there is so much purpose already, as you say, embedded in every atom in creation, in every being. So why not discovering that? Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Very interesting
So,
what you say, Raj. Because Krishna says in Gita,
mm,
if you have to create something, even a meaning of everything, this is really
mm,
rajas. But you
mm,
want to harmonize with a thing that is already existing, then you already have a sattvic basic. So I want to
mhm.
harmonize with intention existing everywhere. So sorry, we
Yeah.
just
No,
continue.
no. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you so much. And even if it's sattva, and so I may say our goal is not sattva, but even that sattva is such an ideal takeoff platform to orient our journey, like from the idea of I don't need to be imposing, so to say, my own creation into the environment of purpose and meaning, but just to mine, to unearth the ultimate purpose, to extract the ultimate purpose from every atom potentially. So that's
Mm,
way more not only relieving but exciting adventure basically.
mm.
So
When I
yeah.
was when I was in university, you know,
Mm,
the really the deepest thing I learned, this was during a lecture. One student from the previous class, he just ran in because he forgot something and
mm,
took it and ran out again. And the professor became very silent and smiled and said, "This was colonialism."
mm,
Because you like project your own intention on something completely different. So this was
mm,
a deep thing.
mm,
And if I have to put my own intention on a reality, this is a certain kind of colonialism also.
mm, mm. Thank you for that. I mean, it's easy to criticize colonialism, but it's not so easy to detect all the layers of colonialism and how we behave on a daily basis. No, and this idea that the reality has an intention already. Yeah, thank you for that one liner. I may stop the podcast here and just remain thinking of that line. Reality has an intention. Thank you so much. So, anyhow, after this warming up, I mean, now you are witnessing which are our exchanges with Krishna Chandra Prabhu. Although some of you are witnessing our conversation live, this is the normal conversation we have had when we met first, and we were like in a train for a few hours. When we returned from the mountains a few days ago, in the train again for a few hours. It's just from one topic to another in a very natural way, being carried by the waves of hopefully honest inquiry and conversation. So that the idea is that today's conversation will not be an exception to that rule. So hopefully you can feel it as informal as possible. And that said, we have a title for today's lecture. not lecture, but conversation, which is the beauty of non-conformity. And we chose this title, I will say, in consideration of the nature of both and the things that we share in common, and the importance of that we consider to think outside of the box, to be very careful of not labeling other people, of not submitting blindly to forms of conformity in the name of surrender, to try to be honest about not living a lie in the name of spirituality, and so many other things that hopefully will come out today in our conversation. And this particular title is in connection with one, as usual, one of the different radicals that appear in the second part of the manifesto, Radical Personalism, part 2 of the book. And in this case, it will be the radical called radical freedom. So today we will not only be talking about non-conformity, but in that connection about freedom. So I will share a few lines, the corresponding few lines, which happen to be in page 129 from the book, and then we will proceed to unfold, flesh out whatever wants to be manifest. It says, shame, guilt, and fear are not the way to conceive of and relate to reality, especially to ultimate reality, the sweet absolute. Ours is a positive oriented tradition, and we adore a loving and most merciful God. Although most Gaudiyas know this in theory, we still need to actualize our own potential by the way we embody each of these core values. We call this radical freedom. Mhm.
Wow.
So, in connection to this section, is that we have been inspired today to also name our conversation "The Beauty of Non-Conformity." Mhm. So, Krishna Chandra Prabhu, I don't know if you have any thoughts that you may like to share in connection to what we have just read, or anything that comes to your mind in relation to radical freedom, the beauty of non-conformity, and so on.
Mm. Maharaj, thank you. Just these few lines are very precious. And it's quite interesting that in our tradition, there is a lot of emphasis on anugatya, on like following, and you have to be in line, and you have to following the footsteps and things like this. But if this aspect is not going completely together with radical freedom, like the deepest choice, then it's something like expected love, and it becomes something very strange.
Mm-hmm.
And in the whole tradition, I have seen much more lectures about the need of following, of to be a follower, than the need of to be an extreme free entity.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not so much emphasized. And that's why we both feel there is a lot of expectation of conformity in a tradition. And our Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he has like a line that he many times quotes, that we are not form makers, we are form breakers.
Yeah.
Yes. And that it needs in every spiritual tradition, it needs that the deepest content of truth has to be put again in the front, has to be again in the front line. And the Latin word to put something in the front line again,
Com-
that is
confront.
or provocation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Pro means in front, and vocare
Mm.
means there is a vocal there. It has to be said to be again in the front.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in conformity, normally we don't like so much this aspect of provocation, but how important it is. And if we see our dear Gauranga, he's like the archetype of provocation in so many ways. Like
Hmm.
most of the close associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are persons completely outcast in that certain society. They are from lower caste, they're even from Muslim circumstances, or it's like this happiness of provocation is not much loved, and this means there is a certain layer of expectation of conformity.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, lots to think about from what you have just said. A few thoughts that come to mind. Of course, first of all, I loved your idea of expected love. I mean, I don't love the idea in itself. I love how you framed it, but also I love the idea of fleshing out that love doesn't have to be in that way, basically. And love requires freedom. If there's no freedom, there cannot be love. Today we were talking about that with the devotees, how freedom is the necessary price to pay for love. And of course, freedom has its price and its risks, but that's the
Ah,
price of love. So if we really want love, we will be willing to pay the price with all risks involved. That's part of our commitment to the ideal of love, uh, and how part of that, and entering into that space of freedom, allowing ourselves to be free, even allowing ourselves, like Gandhi will say, to make mistakes. Even if they say, no, I won't give you freedom because you will make a mistake. Give me the freedom to make a mistake. so I appreciate this idea that you're mentioning about provocation, or I like, in my book I use the word confrontation. The two words generally we don't feel very comfortable about in society. We immediately feel, oh, there's something bad, you shouldn't be doing that. But also that shows how much we sometimes lost the original meaning of words, and how many times we end up using words that have many times the opposite meaning. Like you say, you hear provocation and it sounds like something undesirable. You use confrontation, and you feel that shouldn't be happening. So that shows how we get sidetracked in history from what the word actually meant and what we make of that, to avoid the actual meaning of the word, so to say. How we create alternative meanings to words so we don't have to deal with the actual substance of that term, which implies, again, putting in front of us those things that need to be uh, ascertained, acknowledged, seen, embraced. Uh, Freedom being one of them, of course, as you mentioned, because personally I feel, if there's not only if there's no freedom, but let's say if there's insufficient freedom, that will end up nourishing and assisting, as I put in my book, impersonalism. No?
mhm,
So to be impersonal means also to not allow sufficient freedom, not only to suffocate all freedom, but not allow sufficient freedom that needs to be expressed for love to be a fully informed and voluntary decision.
mm,
And to understand, as you mentioned, and today someone in a lecture asked, on one side we have surrender, you use the term anugatya. So how to harmonize surrender with the idea of being free, no? And the importance of understanding, yeah, surrender is voluntary. Surrender is the most voluntary decision. We need the most freedom to choose that we want to surrender, basically, because so many times we associate these terms with something forced, with something that I have no other option, so I do it because if not, this will happen to me. All this type of negative connotations, instead of seeing surrender as the most, hopefully the most voluntary and joyful decision. I'm choosing to surrender, and I'm taking full responsibility for that with joy. No.
mm. Yes,
So
it's like in your book you mention, and in your lectures again and again, how sometimes it's important to have like some therapeutical aspect solved in us, that the
mm,
living being is happy in this world, is like satisfied in this world, because to an unsatisfied being then the offer of bhakti is coming. And that, oh yeah, this is a way that I can escape from the
mm,
moroseness and sadness of my being. But this is not freedom. And this is
mm.
not a romantic affair between Thakurji and its jiva, the soul, but this is
Not at
like
all.
another fourth thing. This is not out of a free will. That's why it's important to be happy. This is one of the questions we ask everyone who wants to stay longer in the ashram here. Are you
Mm,
happy in this world? And if someone says, no,
mm,
it's horrible and I don't like, then we don't say, oh, then you are a candidate for bhakti. But they say, no, then it's better you don't go. Because we don't want to, and we don't have the capacity to work too much on a therapeutical level. But
mm,
we say in the tradition so many times, it's a bhakti. Oh, you suffer so much and the world is really a cruel place. That's why you should surrender. This
mm,
is in the best way Vaidhi Bhakti, but it's
mm,
not that what really the acharyas want to offer. It's not the
mm,
path of fascination, which is a choice and not a
mm.
must because I cannot tolerate it anymore.
Thank you for sharing that, because for me that helps even more to make it clear that in our particular tradition we ideally embrace this path called Raganuga Bhakti or Raga Bhakti. And all that we are talking about has to do with that. No, all that one may feel this is a completely disconnected issue, but not. If you, as you mentioned very nicely, if you are predominated by fear and calculation, and you approach bhakti just to get rid of, or because you have to, that creates a certain sense of orientation toward the practice, which is not very favorable to what raga bhakti is about. Like as you very beautifully depicted, we can call it the path of fascination, no, or the path of, yeah, astonishment and spontaneous, like, attraction, adventure. That's the opposite. Conformity on one side, I will say, and risk taking on another. Let's put it like that. No, like rules, fear, and on another side, like adventure, uh, fearlessness, aliveness. To put it in the best possible way, and aliveness. You need freedom for that. No,
Mm.
and it may be risky again. And we may be afraid of entering into certain unknown arena, and we may prefer to keep everything on bay and do something. But that's also so much, how to say, I prefer to to have some fear of jumping into something that is totally fascinating, but still there may be some fear of, I'm jumping into the no. But I prefer to have that hesitation that having the fear of calculating and have to do, because if not, I'm afraid of. That type of fear I don't want. I prefer the fear
Yeah.
accompanying the risk taken in the path of fascination. No, I always hear this famous quote that says, "Always do what you are afraid to do." No, in this
Mhm.
connection. Now, if there
Mm.
is something that gives you fear, in this type of fear, try to embrace the adventure, and because on
Mhm.
top of that fear will be fascination again.
Mhm.
The
So this would
invitation.
mean it's
Yeah,
this would
sorry.
mean it's an invitation, exactly that fear. You know, it's
Yeah.
very interesting. Krishna speaks 2 times in Bhagavad Gita, in the 3rd chapter and in the 4th chapter, verse 20. He says, Tyaktva karma falasangam nitya tripta
Mm,
nirashraya. A
mm,
person who is nitya tripta, he
mhm,
is constantly satisfied within himself. He's like happy in this world. He should become nir ashraya,
mm,
without any dependence of
mm,
anything in this world,
mm,
without any ashray. It's very interesting how many times we say you have to always look for ashray, but
mm,
maybe that's what you call risk. Is, can you be without any ashray,
mm,
not to depend, not to look for security that all dependency structures will offer you, but
mm,
really look for truth, which is a risk.
mm,
And Raj, something you mentioned before that struck me. You said freedom, one has to pay a price.
Hmm.
Can you elaborate? What is this price of freedom?
Well, there's a few things to say about that, of course. Also, we can talk about the price of not choosing freedom. Of course, there is a price for everything. I will make that clear, because sometimes we think, okay, if freedom has a price, then I don't want to pay a price, so I choose the opposite of freedom. That has another price, and it's way. It seems it's cheaper, but at the end of the day, it's way higher. No, the price we pay for not choosing freedom. So, of course, I would like to make clear again, freedom is the, before going to the price of freedom, freedom is like the norm in our tradition. Even in the relationship guru disciple, as you are mentioning, how sometimes we understand this idea of taking shelter or surrender or anugati, and we may interpret that with, I have no choice of my own anymore, no criteria. But for example, you quoted the Gita, and at the end of the Gita, when Krishna is talking with Arjuna, he's inviting Arjuna to, okay, now you fully deliberate on what I shared with you, and then do as you please. No, so Krishna, the guru figure, is telling the disciple, okay, now you decide what to do with what I gave you. No, now there is the freedom part. So of course there is a price to pay for freedom, in the sense, of course, first of all, that we need to. It's a beautiful price. No, it's not a bad word. Price. I mean, to be free, you have to be courageous. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be. Uh, you have to enter into this arena of risk taking. Even at the end of the day, you will realize there was no actual risk. When you are fully realized, as Srila Siddhar Maharaj will say, in the beginning you feel too much risk, no gain. Then you will realize the more the risk, the more the gain. But at the end, you will realize actually there was no risk. Everything was gain. But we will perceive that there is some risk on some level, because again, some sections of our complacency, our conformity, have to be put on the fire, so to say. Uh, and that feels like a price to pay, so to say. No, we have to let go on certain things we are doing. Hmm? As we are talking today of the beauty of non-conformity, of course we have to talk about the dangers of conformity. No, so for example, conformity has a lot to do with um, the need to satisfy others permanently and maintain appearances. No, that's conformity. No, I keep an appearance of who I am, and I'm completely absorbed in trying to keep everyone happy, pleasing everyone, so I can fit in. No, which is not the same as I put in my book, to belong. We actually need to belong deeply, not merely fit in. But many times we choose conformity uh, and confuse like fitting in with belonging, conformity with actual participation. So, so the price of conformity is to live a lie. Basically, that's a high price to pay. I don't want to pay that price. So, because if you live a lie, if you take in a lie, you must take all that belongs to it. No, it's not just my life is a lie, so that's it. No, that's a huge price to pay. So the price of conformity is to live a lie, and the price of non-conformity, of the price of freedom, is probably to begin with to realize I'm living a lie. And that can be painful as death. That's a death, literally, that we have to go through. One of many. So, some initial thoughts regarding the price to pay for freedom. To probably acknowledge how enslaved we are, and how we have chosen that from so many places, how we have chosen to betray ourselves in so many ways, how we have escaped from, how afraid we are of freedom. And that's part of the price to pay for freedom, to acknowledge, to awaken to those facts. I'm terrified about being free. Although on a mouth lip service I may say freedom ki jai, but when the opportunity is given for me to fully be myself and take full responsibility, we may realize many times I choose someone else to tell me what to do, think for me, feel for me, live for me, which is not possible, of course, but we try hard enough. So, some words. What do you think about that, Krishna Chandra?
Wow. Thank you very much. Taking a risk, it's such a deep thing, because we think that security is the highest gain, and then slowly leaving a certain security. Yeah, it's not easy. I have to, like you say, not just go through a bodily death. This is always the small brother. It's called the bodily death. Big brother is leaving a certain mentality that I was carrying for many lifetimes in me. And when the soul is like outside the embrace of divine love, naturally the soul starts holding for some insignificant securities, and how this has to be left. And beside, this is a very big risk. And I always see when the atmosphere of being cared for and being carried, in German one says Aufgehobenheit, which is a very beautiful word, then there is a very strong tendency for conformity. So that's why Carl Jung, he says in many scriptures, he says, ideology is compensation for a deep faith. If I don't risk myself to really enter the open field, the free field of choosing him, Goptritve Varana, then it's much easier than to grasp to certain ideology. It's a compensation of deep faith. And we always see it tends then to fundamentalism. And actually, it's always a sign of a weakness. It's a person who is not willing to risk, to go on a path, to risk freedom, because it always feels, how to say, secure to be in your cage. And it also so many religious cage, and also Gaudiya cage.
And because so many people is doing the same thing, no? Also, this principle is there. No, most of us become conformists because everyone else is doing that, so it feels natural. So I just joined the party, right? It happens so many in that, like a collective phenomenon, no? Like, or even it gets reinforced because so many times something that happens is that sometimes we conform to something publicly that internally we don't agree with. That even happens sometimes. No, we may disagree with something, but publicly we do not. We conform to that. So the people who sees us conforming to that publicly, they assume that we are actually conforming to that internally as well. So that heightens the inclination to conform. So everyone else is feeding each other on that and creates more and more layers of conformity, basically.
Yeah, this means there's an atmosphere of not inviting a doubt. So I want to belong to the group. So that's why I choose, inside I don't believe it. Like many statements we have even in our scriptures about ladies, about dependency, and one doesn't feel it's right, but I want to belong to the group, so I'm participating. So that this means there is not an atmosphere of freedom, of inviting all doubts. It can be confronted.
Yeah, and I think that gets closer and closer to a totalitarian regime, basically, because everyone is publicly conforming, and we know that some are not agreeing with that internally, but externally they have to conform because they want to belong. Although that's not belonging, again, that's fitting in. Because deep belonging means I can be who I am with my doubts, voicing my disagreements, and there is a place for that, and that makes a place for actually belonging, doubts included. But if you don't give the freedom of that, even no one is forbidding that officially, but if, as you say, if that's not being, if we are not inviting enough people enough to present their doubts and that's a way of saying that's being forbidden. No,
Yeah.
no, there's not enough emphasis on freedom of expression, if you want to put it like that.
There's a story of, actually, it's a theater play of Bertolt Brecht. He's a German writer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during the time of Stasi. This means in East Germany during the communist um, dictatorship, actually. So
Mm-hmm.
there was, there were always people looking at you constantly. And one person was a servant of a Stasi, of
Mm-hmm.
one who is like a heavy police agent. And he was whole life, he was forced to say yes. Internally, he really didn't believe it. And actually, he became, each time he said yes and meant
Mm-hmm.
no inside, he became
Mm-hmm.
weaker in his personality. And then one day, at the end of the theater play, this Stasi, he died. And he teared the corpse through the whole apartment, put him on the balcony and threw him from the balcony, and was shouting, "No!" So it's like the first time to regain power again. So, but it's a sad story of when there is an atmosphere in spiritual traditions where one has to go according to certain expectations. Actually, each
Mm-hmm.
time one cannot express it. One has to, like you say, you fit in and you don't belong. Your own aliveness is going down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and especially I mean, that can be so dangerous. What you are mentioning in connection to the story you shared, that we say yes, but actually internally we are saying no. That type of short circuiting, if you like replicate the same pattern a few times, that creates some scar basically for distorting, putting reality like backwards. No, like reading everything in the opposite way, reading
Mm,
everything in the opposite direction. And that can be so dangerous because and I've seen even people like I don't know, sitting on a biasasan and disagreeing completely on a series of things, but saying what is expected from them to say,
mm,
and just becoming, how to say, a slave of expectations, so to say. No, and for me, Krishna consciousness is not so much about fitting in with the expectations, at least not expectations that are uh, conformist. Again,
mm,
because someone may have beautiful expectations. I don't know if the word should be expectation, but Krishna has seen our bright, beautiful potential. He's seeing, wow, no, you can be all this. So there's some
mm,
expectation, so to say, stemming from that, but it's not the same like limited and limiting expectation that sometimes many of us are throwing onto one another or establishing as standard to fit in. No,
mm,
maybe we are not using those words to tell people that, but indirectly we are telling them, as long as you don't fit with our expectations, you cannot be part of our tribe.
mm,
And
mm,
that's so exhausting. It puts people on oof, such a journey of trying to fit in, trying to, and if they do not fit in, they feel that they don't belong. Again, they confuse fitting in with belonging. And also we have this idea that I also mentioned in my book of honor and shame. Now sometimes we create this honor shame culture, no, which sometimes there's exaggerated form of praise and over idealization, but very quickly it invokes the counterpart of that, no, like extreme shame and blame. No, if you do not do this, if you don't fit in, you are an outcast, you cannot belong. Sorry, no. uh, uh, and that takes away dignity from people, and that gives people the message that the only dignity you can attain is by fitting in, by attaining authority, position, honor, prestige, respect, assets. That's dignity. Instead
mm,
of telling people, give yourself inner dignity, give
mm,
yourself the inner dignity, try to see how you are already a glorious soul loved by God, extract dignity from that instead of forcing dignity from outside to inside.
Mhm.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. What you said about the shame and the fear of the being in a tribe, and the religious group are quite intense tribes, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
there is from a very old structure since thousands of years, not being part of the group meant death. When you were like living in a forest, in a little tribe, when you were excommunicated.
Mm-hmm.
And for hundreds and hundreds of years in the Catholic Church, excommunication meant death. Meant you, and not just a physical death, but actually it meant ontological death. You're like doomed as a soul. So
Yeah. Yeah.
this
I,
kind of
I
feeling.
can I can I can empathize with your words. I have some experience in that.
I
Yeah.
also.
Yeah. 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 And how it's wonderfully how people immediately, as you mentioned, even today, puts you in that label. No, you have been excommunicated. You have been rejected. That means you have no ontological standing whatsoever. You are out
Mm,
of the equation of valid existence, so to say. You stop to exist. Basically, that's the message. No, you are excommunicated, and immediately so many people, for example, stop to talk to you, which
mm,
basically is another way of saying, for me, you stopped existing from now on. So it's
mm,
another way of denying your ontological presence. You
mm,
stopped existence because you have been, as you say, kicked out of the tribe. You're no longer belong. So that's equal to ontological death.
mm,
So, I mean, we laugh about that, but that can be so terribly shocking and traumatic and cruel, even. No?
mm,
Imagine treating someone suddenly from one day to another, like from now on, you stop existing, basically, and you have no right for continuing. Or in our community, label people as apparatus or whatever, something they may have done in the past. Uh, and that's it. That's who they are forever. And simultaneously glorifying the extreme mercy of Mahaprabhu and the costless grace of Nityananda, and at the same time labeling people forever out of it. So that's like, I mean, we need to recalculate, no? Like the GPS will say, recalculating what we are understanding of all this.
yeah. Maybe it needs a little bit more a rebellious spirit. These persons who were like thrown out of conformative places, they could be the most interesting person. One should invite them, and one should give them a voice. It could be quite interesting. And this is something I also don't see so much cared in the Gaudiya community, that there is two, how to say, two aspects which are extremely important in each one's spiritual life. This is devotion and rebellion.
Hmm.
So if a person only has a devoted side, then it's like it can quickly become a sentimentalist idea. And if a
Mhm.
person is just rebellious without surrendering to a higher source of everything, then he just becomes a normal political activist.
Mhm.
So actually, in my life, I was searching for the connection of these two sides, how important it is. And I was at the University of Zurich, and there I met like one of my first gurus in this life. He's
Mhm.
a he gave a lecture, and it was written Daniel Berrigan, Catholic anarchist. So it shook my heart because
I
it
will
was
join that lecture. I will join that lecture for sure.
connected what I looked for. And he was, um, I think Richard Rohr was quite close with him also. They had contemplative prayer groups in America where they deeply prayed for a week, and then they entered in a factory which they produce weapons and destroyed as much as they could, and then again went praying. So it's like
Mhm.
something like a spiritual activism.
Mhm.
Of course, he was being searched like the terrorist in America, and he could never ever go back there. It
Mm.
became a dangerous thing. So I think this is a very interesting way, that these two aspects need very much to be connected. Also, it needs uh, a devoted side, a surrender, and
Mm.
needs a rebellion. It needs
Mm.
like a revolution.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about the rebellion side, like part of the boldness of
Mm,
love, so to say. No, as Sri Radha or higher personalities, of course, I'm going a little bit beyond now. In the Leela,
yeah.
they will show certain boldness as a part of love. We could say that's a rebellion nature when she's in man, when she's angry with Krishna and so on. There's some non-cooperative element to love, but it's increasing. It's a symptom of love, and it's increasing the experience of love. So somehow, going back to our particular situation, a correspondent natural expression of devotion should be also some form of, yeah, rebelliousness, boldness, not, as you mentioned, not for rebelliousness sake. No, it's not
Mm,
like here we are promoting anarchy for anarchy's sake, or non-conformity merely for the sake of non-conformity, but in the context of something bigger and for the sake of something bigger, for new pursuits, new ideals, deeper commitments. And yeah, I agree that in the present state of our community, that's not something very much um, promoted, if you will, or even like appreciated. Sometimes it may be seen as you are controversial, and that word controversial, which is not a bad word, will be labeled as something, again, bad, confrontational, provocative, going back to all these terms that sometimes has been historically stigmatized. But
mm,
I think that, as you mentioned, there it need to be revived in the context of devotion again, because again the risk is there to become too much of an activist and too much of a rebel without a cause, as they say, which implies if you have a cause, there is reason to be rebellious. Uh,
mm.
and again, rebellious with truth in hand. So, for the
Yeah.
sake of truth, I always remember this quote from, and I quote that in my book, famous line from Alexander Solzhenitsyn from the Gulag Archipelago, and he will say, "A single, something like that, single individual speaking the truth can bring down a tyranny. An
Mm,
entire tyranny can be brought down by a single individual speaking the truth. But in a tyranny, to speak the truth, that means you are a rebel,
mm,
basically. Now, if you dare to speak the truth in a environment where truth is not popular, you are rebellious, you are bold. No, in my book, I like to use the word prophet for referring to those people. Not prophet like someone necessarily Shakti Abhis Avatar Nitya Siddha descending from
yeah.
Golok, but
Yes.
someone who is willing to talk about the untalkable, no,
Mm,
willing to give voice to the voiceless, no, willing to like open an arena of further conversation. And in that sense, we may say that people will generate a crisis by what they are talking. They will
mm.
create some unsettling, no, uh, they will evoke a crisis, and that's a gift of the prophet, so to say. And of
Yeah.
course, that's why generally prophets are seen as troublemakers, and they're
Yeah.
oftentimes they are killed, basically.
Yeah. You know, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, our
Mm.
Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was asked, you create havoc everywhere you go, you create difficult situations. So why do you call your magazine Harmonist? Because everywhere you go, there is some fight going on. And
Yeah, that's a good question.
the answers he gave himself was very, very deep. He said,
Ah,
harmony with that eternal realm has
mm,
to create turbulence in a
mm,
in a world that started sleeping completely, that in a world that fell asleep. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why, in one way, a person who is in deepest harmony with the will of God, naturally he will be the biggest confrontation in a world where even Krishna is saying in Gita, yoga nashta parantapa. Again and again, I'm trying to establish an atmosphere of truth, and again, it falls apart. So, when one tries to put a harmony here, he becomes a threat for the
Mm-hmm.
status quo. And this is a
Mm-hmm.
dangerous thing. So, start loving that havoc is wonderful. And I'm very happy that you extended it even to the spiritual world before. How Shrimati Radhika, in many verses, even in Padyavali, Tyajantu Bandava Sarve Nindantu Guravejana Tathapi Mama Sarvasam Govinda Mama Jivanam. Where Shrimati Radhika is saying, it may be that all my relatives reject me. It may be that my Gurujan, my superiors, they leave me and criticize me heavily. But I have to tell you something. Govinda is my very life, So it's exactly that spirit that you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Non-conformity to the extreme. She's the
Yes.
ultimate non-conformist. Yeah, yeah. I mean, God is the ultimate, the supreme non-conformist. So we have to, how to say, as you mentioned, we have to conform to parampara, but the spirit of conforming to the parampara is a lineage of non-conformity. So we are conforming to a lineage of non-conformity, so to say. So that means we are becoming non-conformists uh, ourselves, no? And I know that again, one requires patience. I'm not expecting that non-conformity will become very popular, because only a few people have patience with deconstructing all the lies that may be there established as truth, all the lies in oneself, of course, all the deconstruction of ego, or sometimes even deconstruction of whole groups and institutions that have been like infused by lies or wrong ways of doing things, and they need to be fleshed out gradually. So, but yeah, that's in the higher realms, and somehow that has to be reflected here as a commitment to truth. Let me share a few lines that came to my mind when you mentioned Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I shared in my book a few lines here. He says, uh, one second, it's
Yeah.
page 300, and just a few words, how he describes humility in this connection between sometimes, many times, as you mentioned, we may think, but you should be humble. No, we shouldn't be rebellious. Rebellious is the opposite of being submissive. And Mahaprabhu praised submission and humility so much, and surrender. We shouldn't be bold and rebellious and humility. But what does it mean, humility? It has so many meanings, of course. And one of those, Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta will say, without cheating anyone, we should boldly proclaim the truth to everyone. If the truth is bitter or unpopular, but bestows blessings on the living entities, we must speak it. Unless we fearlessly speak the truth, the sweet absolute will not be pleased. And then he becomes even more intense. The aggressive pronouncement of the concrete truth is the crying necessity of the moment for silencing the aggressive propaganda of specific untruths that is being spread all over the world. And so on. Now he continues, but it's a little bit too long. Too long. Humility implies perfect submission to the truth and no sympathy for untruth, and so on. So yeah, I totally agree with your point, and I appreciate what you mentioned on how if in a particular place, world, society, group, family, truth is not the norm, someone who stands for truth will be seen as a threat, will be labeled as bad, confrontational, controversial. But that's not so much, those labels are not speaking so much about how bad that person is, but how compromised we are in our ideals, that when someone speaks the truth, we'll feel threatened. No? So that actually sheds light to the condition we may be, where we feel a representative of truth as a dangerous person, no?
Wow.
So
A crying necessity to stand up,
yeah.
you know, and have a freedom for that. This is wonderful.
Since you mentioned the idea of freedom, Krishna Chandra Prabhu, going back to that point in particular, and I recall we talked a little bit a few weeks ago when we were in Switzerland. You mentioned to me something in connection to Eric Fromm, in connection to
Oh,
freedom and the fear of freedom we may have. I don't know if you would like to share with all of us some of those reflections, because I think it's an important point to understand why we are so terrified about freedom, basically.
mhm. It's quite interesting, you know. Erich Fromm, he wrote a book in German. It's called Angst, Furcht vor der Freiheit, and the English they made it, I think, Escape of Freedom. It's the title in English, and he wrote it in 1941. So this means in the middle of the First World War, a Second World War. So, and he was
Escape. Yeah, the name is Escape from Freedom or The Fear of
Escape.
Freedom. There are two options. Yeah.
Okay, yes, this is his book.
That's for those who would like to look for the material eventually. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, it's written in 1941, I think. So
Yes,
it's like a very intense. He was so threaded. How can a whole country suddenly follow a dictator? How can it be that millions and millions of people go to extreme unhuman things? And so this, and he says that the socialization of the surrounding, and also the religion, didn't give them, the people, a taste of freedom. And that's why they prefer, when they don't have this, and the risk of this freedom, they try to orient themselves only of power and subordination, or gehorsam. I don't know the English word. This means to follow and to be a follower. So this is quite a threatening structure. So he wrote this whole book, and it's like the whole book is an invitation, not of only political freedom, but mainly the deep, to risk a freedom in ourselves, to not just become dependent from some external structures, you know, not just to feel at home when it. And then he says also, not this fear of freedom, it needs like a monism, the opposite of radical personalism. It needs a one, like the dictatorship. It needs a one opinion that is valued, and
one
cannot
narrative.
be, one narrative. It cannot be happy with extreme pluralism, and it cannot be like in favor of that. And when we, for example, look at Brihad-bhagavatamrita, it's very interesting. In the higher realms, we accompany Gop Kumar in his travel, the bigger the diversity is becoming. So, but he has to be extremely happy in different ways how things were done, and be fascinated by that. If a person is just reduced to himself and not fascinating from extreme variety of expressions, this means he follows that what Erich Fromm is saying, you know. He needs a security, he cannot question any authority, and he needs just one narrative, because otherwise his whole thing would scatter, his whole building would scatter.
Yeah, I really like the. I quoted Eric Fromm also in my book, and I recalled, I think, something that we also talk with each other, that he will use this term of authoritarian religion
Yeah.
specifically, how in authoritarian religion, like the subjective experience of the participants is that of subordinating themselves to a higher power in obedience and reverence and worship, but it's not a surrender that is in response to love, to the love that the authority may display, but rather just because the authority holds power over them, basically. No,
Mhm.
and in those systems, the main sin is disobedience, basically. No,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
here again comes this idea of obedience, disobedience, because we hear the word obedience so many times, but and Eric Fromm contrasts the notion of authoritarian religion with that of humanitarian, basically. No?
Mm.
Humanitarian religion is what we may call radical personalism, where it's basically stands that you become unexploitable instead of
Mm.
disempowered and abused. So I think that's an important way of putting it. You know, how we can practice bhakti in a way that we become unexploitable. No?
Mm.
Because many times these systems, as you are describing, are completely disempowering. So we become very susceptible to exploitation, very exploitable.
Mm.
I mean, as you say, very fearful of more than one narrative, very fearful of nuance, very fearful of diversity. While actually our whole goal, as you beautifully described with the example of Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which for me is such an important book, in the sense of it sets so many precedents for us as a lineage to pay attention to. One of them being, the more you progress, as you mentioned, the more diversity there will be, and the more your fascination with that diversity has to be there, so you can appreciate the ultimate diversity that will be shown in the goal you want to attain in Braj, so to say. If you are
Mm.
not able to be fascinated by all the preliminary diversity, you won't be able to appreciate the full diversity that is there in Golok. And that's how Gopakumar passes the test. No, he's going to so many places, and fascination after fascination and increased fascination, chamatkar,
Mm.
instead of the sense of security that I better stay here, which is somehow the offering he will receive from so many places, if you will, if you want to take it like that. Devotees offering, you can stay here and be happy here. You won't need anything. Everything is settled. Security. Oh, wow, I can stay here for eternity. But there is some further thirst and further, how to say, potential for fascination that keeps Gopakumar going. No, that's
Mm.
somehow the fuel. The fuel of his journey is this intuition of further potential for fascination,
Mm.
which is
Mm.
for me another way of saying rasa sar chamatkar. No, the essence of rasa is this experience of astonishment, basically.
Yes, yes. You know, what would be bhakti out of expectation? In beginning of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna is himself even saying, Sakale jagate more kore vidhi bhakti brajabhava paiti nahi shakti. You know, the whole universe is full of people doing it because it's their dharma, because they should do it and it's okay, because it's expected of the jiva. It's your eternal dharma. But it's not enough. Krishna is saying this kind of fuel for your for your inner longing is not strong enough to bring you to the realm of Braj. And this is the most interesting place where the most intense variety is there of so many ways of how to serve Krishna, like all the five rasas and all the seven uparasas in full expression. But it's
Mm,
not a concurrence, it's not, how to say, competition. It's
mm,
just extreme happiness about others are serving. So, and this is like the biggest excitement of freedom, that the less freedom I can tolerate, the more the interpretation can only be one, the narrative can only be one. But the more the freedom is enlarged, naturally they can be an extreme plurality of expressions. And there needs to be a happiness for that. For me,
Yeah,
this is Vrindavan. This must be the spiritual world.
yeah. Yeah, and we need full freedom to accommodate full diversity, basically, as you mentioned, no? The more the
Yeah.
freedom we have, the more the diversity we can accommodate. Because if not, too much diversity without corresponding freedom will be like too much, no?
Mhm.
So I appreciate the verse you quoted from Chaitanya Charitamrita, because now it's coming to me this new way of, so to say, defining both Bhaidi Bhakti and Raganuga Bhakti. You know, you use the word expectation and fascination. So I like those two. Instead, we can speak of Bhaidi Bhakti as the path of expectation, because again, it is expected for me to serve Krishna because he's God. So I will serve him because he's no, and so many other expectations from people doing that and expecting something back. While Raganuga Bhakti has more to do with chamatkar, astonishment, fascination. So it's an
Mhm.
interesting play of words to put it. Vaidhi Bhakti, the path of expectation; Raga Bhakti, the path of fascination. So which one you want to choose? Again, freedom.
Wow.
Freedom comes there.
It's wonderful. It's like Maharaj in Swaniyam Dashakam of Raghunathas Goswami. He brings this beautiful verse, Anadi Sadi Vapatu Aptimriduva Pratipada.
Mhm.
Raghunathas Goswami, in very deep desperation, he says, some persons say that this Krishna, he's Anadi Sadi, he's the origin of everything, he's the absolute truth. It may be, whoever
Mm,
you are, if you're the absolute truth or just a normal person of Braj, if you Mahavaikunte Shadika Ihanano, if you're the Lord of all material and spiritual planets, or just a small, simple child, I don't care. And if you Pramilat Karunya Karunahina, if you're excessively merciful or cruel like anything,
mm,
now I have to tell you one thing. Whoever you are and whatever you are, you're just my everything. Mamastam Prabhuvara. So this
mm.
is not of a calculation, not of an expectation, nothing. It's
Pure,
just
purely
beautifully.
fascination.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm seeing here that reminds me of the last verse of Sikshastakam, and here Radhamal Prabhu is sharing that here, no? But here that was a comment a little bit a while where we were talking about the havoc that is created by those who speak the truth. But then he quoted Yatata Bhavidadatu Lampato, which is basically how Sirad is saying basically the same. He can embrace me, he cannot embrace me, he can trample on me, he can do whatever he likes. He remains my prananath, no? Fascination on top of every other consideration. So, but again, for that we need freedom. We need to give ourselves the permission, so to say, to be individuals and to be persons. No, and also that brings to my mind the idea that we also quoted, that I also write about in my book, and we talked about in Switzerland, the idea of individuation, going to Jungian terms, the idea of what to do with our individuality and how we can be as individuals as we can, as persons as we can. So we can really make of our sense ourself as our individual being the fullest, most complete, tasteful and diverse offering we can possibly do for the pleasure of our beloved,
Mm.
basically. so
Yes.
so so that's something that I personally consider very important in our stage as sadhakas. Like, yeah, I'm an individual, but how much of an individual I actually am. Mm. How I'm
Mhm.
exercising my freedom in connection to my individual existence. Can I be more free, more of a person? Is there a limit to that? Probably not. In connection to bhakti, there's no limit to the potential of how much I can be a person. So how much am I exploring those things? No?
Yes. It's so wonderful. This word individuality,
Hmm.
it's like this individere. You cannot divide anymore. And the
Hmm.
Greeks, they had another word for the very same thing. They called it atomos. the
Mm-hmm.
atom, that which you
Mm-hmm.
cannot divide anymore.
Mm.
And this Greek word atomos, that which you cannot divide and split anymore, is
Mm.
actually a derivative. It directly comes from the Sanskrit word atma. So
Mm.
this is what you are, this deepest individuality. And it's so fascinating that why is Krishna even interested on an individuality like me? I mean, he has billions and billions of servants in the spiritual world, and like all services are mostly covered, we could say. But no, there is one rasa he can only experience through me, through this kind
Mhm.
tiny jiva who is here in this world. That's why I am an expected being by him,
Mm.
because this is how much an individual we are. And this is the choice to become that is like the
Mm.
biggest expression of freedom. And it gives so much happiness and even pleasure to Radha and Krishna. This is really a fascinating thought.
Yeah.
And there is a commentary of Vyasadev to the first verse of, or second verse of Yoga Sutra, like Chitta
Okay.
Vitti Vritti Nirodha.
Niroda.
And then he asks the question, why are they chitta vrittis? Why are they disturbance in the consciousness of a living being? And he
Mm.
gives an answer. He says, actually, because we are not living the real the possibility of this Atma. And that's why there's like an alarm clock giving, and this is
Mm-hmm.
chitta. You're not living according to your deepest individuality, to the potential of your soul. And we
Mm.
can be extremely lucky that there is chitta vritti, there is disturbance in the mind, because
Mm.
it's a sign that you are not arrived yet at the
Mhm.
potential of your soul. So, and then
Mm.
it's very clear, oh, the yoga system, they try to just be in peaceful surrounding and do some mauna, but this will never work. We are invited to go back to the deepest longing of the soul, to the deepest individuality. And this is only a choice. And like we said before, all expectation and all conformity can never ever bring a soul close to that closest um, goal of any soul.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Once this idea came to me, like we have a commitment to our potential. No,
Mm.
so we exist along with our potential, and we are committed to all to that potential. What that potential means, what that potential represents. If you fully play that out in connection to what Krishna is expecting, if you want to put it like that, from our potential, as you mentioned, I really appreciated your point of how there is a particular experience and service that we can offer. Not from an arrogant place, because quickly
Yeah,
someone may think, who do you think you are? But it's not
yeah,
from a place of arrogance, it's a place of utter humility, because who I mean, I'm nobody to deserve such a thing, but the arrangement has been made in that such a way that there's some unique window of experience that can be provided to Bhagavan that only can come through me. For some reason, that's the reason for me existing. Actually, that's why I exist. Why I exist instead of not existing, because there is something that can only be uniquely provided and offered and tasted by my personal existence and every one of us as well. As I also mentioned once, I think in our lecture in Switzerland, that Radha and Krishna are dying on a daily basis in separation from each other, and our duty in eternity will be to serve their lives. Like creating this contrast of who we are, so insignificant, and we are saving God's life on a daily basis, so to say. Like to make the point that there is some inner dignity in each of us that exists there from time without beginning. And I think that's very reassuring and gives lots of hope and dignity to us, again from a humbling place, not from a arrogant place. but that we can feel, okay, there is something unique that I can offer, and that's my work, so to say, on the Bhakti project, trying to refine that potential, to discover that potential, so I can finally provide that unique experience that can only come through me. So that becomes a whole life mission, and gives so much purpose and meaning to our whole life. And yeah, I really appreciate the way you put it in the way that it's really validating for one's individual existence, instead of just, again, disempowering people, saying you don't matter too much, you're just insignificant, and that's the only part of the equation they present, no? And we could say, yeah, I'm insignificant, but there's a few other things that are not insignificant, that are pretty significant, not only for me, for Krishna himself. So all that has to be brought up to the equation. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm. And
Let me
Maharaj,
share one. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah,
Tell me.
you
No,
go.
tell me.
Please,
No,
I'm listening.
I was going to share one quote that Bhakti Rasa shared, but you had something to share. Please go on.
Okay, after we will, but don't forget it. I want to hear also.
Yeah.
Just another aspect of freedom is like there is a lot of emphasis in the Bhakti movement in the West on preaching efforts. And I think there is a lot of energy wasted in that, because we don't have this deep dignity in a soul that we think, oh, I have to override it, and we have to present and give something, and now they should come. So to have like a very deep a faith in the freedom, and not just to souls coming on the path, but also I saw it many times that if we accompany souls on the path of bhakti, oh, now you have to tell him like this, and maybe he's going away from the path, it has to be like this. So, but have some faith in the path of a soul, allow him that freedom, allow him a certain openness, and not just override his path by certain convictions I carry in myself. And many times this is called preaching. It's like I want to override some convictions other carry in themselves. And this is quite a weak endeavor. Like there is one story of a television priest in America. He had like millions of followers, and then he died, and they came to heaven, and they asked him, so what did you do for the living beings on this world? And he said, don't you know I sent millions to you? And then they said, yeah, it's possible, but no one ever arrived. So this means like when it's not like keeping a freedom to other jivas, for me this is a very important aspect of freedom. I have a deep faith in a path that someone else is going. I don't have to intervene too much, and it's more like by a fascination and not what others should do, that some spark can grow. It's like here in the ashram we have a rule, we can say, that we never distributed one flyer, we never went on the street to give any invitation, and it's 2 hours by foot away from the last road of civilization, but we are like over flooded by persons. And I feel this should be much more an emphasis, and not overwriting the path of others, which is often called preaching.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah, what can I say? I totally agree. I also have written in my book about that, about there is sometimes an overemphasis of proselytation, and sometimes in the name of preaching, which is not a word I personally like to use. I prefer to use other words that may be more specific to what actually has, in my opinion, should be done in the name of extending one's own experience in a natural way, again, while not, yeah, while acknowledging other people's freedom, and not, because many times we, the preaching, and I'm not saying always, but many times people who preaches is just trying to convince others because they are not so convinced enough themselves. So there, I'm not acknowledging my own lack of conviction, and I'm like interfering other people's freedom in the name of universal compassion or something.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I appreciate your point of trying to develop more trust in not only in the nature of the process, but also in the sincerity of every other person. And if they don't want to be sincere, then that's their choice as well. I cannot just like live my life to make other people's more sincere. I mean, I can, of course, I can be a companion, I can support, I can be a witness of other people's journey. But it's, yeah, I think it's important to put a nice delimitation on how much that is supposed to happen, how much is not starting to be an evasion from my own journey, from my own freedom, from my own decision, from my own responsibility, and instead trying to live other people's life, because we know most people like to live other people's life, hear about other people's life, extract themselves from their own lives by looking what other people's are doing. All of them are forms of basically gramya kata or gossip.
mm,
Like if escaping from my own life and trying to control other people's life. So that gossip also can take the form of preaching, so to say,
mm,
in the form of interfering and trying like to, yeah, unless there is very deep sense of compassion and a very natural, I will say personally, very natural overflowing of my own freedom, of my own practice, and that sprinkles other people, even without my intention of trying to control the sprinkling, so to say. That's very, yeah, that's very natural. That gives lots of assurance. Okay, that's happening. As you mentioning, we are not trying to force people come here, but they come. So that gives this the assurance. Okay, those who are coming, despite our non-inviting anyone, okay, they are coming for some reason. So we will honor that
mm.
that presence, so to say. No?
Yes. And
Yeah.
it's like very interesting what you're saying, um, to give the persons a dignity by allowing them, to give them a freedom. It's like this is exactly what the Lord is doing with us. Like in the
Yeah.
fourth canto of Bhagavatam, in the story of Puranjana, is a very moving moment where one looks at our whole journey through these lives to unlimited lifetimes from the
Mm,
perspective of Paramatma. You
mm,
know, how in every life, how he tries to knock on our
mm,
door, but we
mm,
didn't want. So he was never overwriting that will, which is very amazing. And then it's the Narad Muni speaks about Agyata Bandhu. There is this very
mm,
close friend that you have
mm,
forgotten for such a long time.
mm, mm,
And you know, when by some decisions, by some choices of bhakti, which is called Sukriti in the beginning, Agyata Sukriti and then Gyata Sukriti. So these are some choices from the side of the Atma. This gives some freedom to Paramatma to intervene.
mm,
So it's quite an interesting perspective that the practice of bhakti gives freedom to God to intervene. That's what he
mm,
already wanted since long time. He wanted
mm,
to intervene, but he respected our right for ignorance in
mm,
a strong way. So this is, you know, this very moving moment to look our journey through the lifetime and what we did since millions of lifetimes from the perspective of the closest friend of Paramatma who was accompanying us through all these different forms of lives. It's a very moving story. And they said, oh, I'm sorry, I actually reduced your freedom by my stubbornness to forget you.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that for me, that's wonderful to think also like how someone like, again, Paramatma can be witnessing our plight and suffering in the context of that, wishing that we turn our faces to him and establish some connection. So there's so much suffering, but at the same time, there's so much, as you say, respect for our right to remain in ignorance, as you mentioned, because that's like the preliminary stage of love. If I'm respecting your freedom, I'm honoring you as an individual, and if there is love, let's have it in a voluntary way. If you are not choosing love fully, I cannot impose that on you. So even though I'm suffering like hell, seeing you suffering so much, at the same time, I honor the idea of love so much that I cannot go against the very nature of love, as a general rule at least, and just force that upon everyone. Because sometimes that's a classical question, of why we suffer. No, if God is all good, all merciful, why we suffer? And actually, the actual reply, although it may sound totally contradictory, is why we suffer because God loves us. I say, what? Yes, because He loves you. He's willing to give you the freedom to choose yourself to love Him. And giving freedom to choose means you have to have at least one more option, at least two. And one option will be to love Him, another option will be to ignore Him. And the consequence of ignoring Him is that you are suffering. But all that is coming because He loves you. He's giving you that choice, that freedom. So, strictly speaking, you can reply to that question like that. We suffer because God loves us. Of course, we need to unpack that answer so people doesn't freak out even more. But,
Yeah. And I think it's important in that connection to add that this suffering is not that what people call suffering in this world, like sickness and dying and losing things, but it's actually, I have only one suffering as a jiva. I'm suffering unconscious separation of him.
hmm,
And this is how a sadhu sees persons. Sometimes they're externally suffering or they're in extreme happiness. But for the sadhu, he sees the only one suffering they carry in themselves. It's a
hmm,
separation.
hmm, hmm,
Otherwise, it becomes too dualistic.
mhm.
But Maharaj, now I'm eager for Bhakti Rasa's quote.
Okay. She shares a few. We will read it later. All of them, they are online, but let me share one of them. She just shared one right now. She said a new one. She said, God gives us the freedom to consent. He requires it otherwise, like you are both saying, because of love. So that's something that she shared recently, but let's share the one that I had in mind. We may be going regressing a little bit to our previous topic, but maybe we can go there before wrapping up today's conversation. So she's saying, too much, she's quoting something we mentioned some minutes ago, too much diversity without accompanying freedom. That might be the destructive form of chaos. Too many choices without the freedom to choose is anxiety created by modern culture. So many choices and no permission to choose within freedom.
Mm.
So that was one of the reflections that Bhakti was mentioning in relation to too much diversity without freedom, too many choices without freedom, what to do in our particular situation. Yeah.
I think this is a
So,
very natural development also in the gunas. The more
mm,
a person is covered by tamas, there
mhm,
is actually no freedom. There is only structures from the past acting. And the more the one
mm,
is moving towards sattva and also towards devotion, it becomes more freedom there.
mhm,
So naturally, this is like this development of enlarging is is coming. And I think I just want to take up one more little thought in my
Yeah.
heart. There is this, the more one turns to matter, like to mechanism, then everything is predictable. Sometimes some people think the whole universe is just matter, and they suffer actually that everything is like predictable. There is no freedom anymore. There is
Mm.
no actual choice. So,
Mm-hmm.
but the more one is going to the other extreme of a worldview, of prema, of divine love, then everything is surprise at every moment, even for Radha and Krishna themselves. So it's like very interesting. Even at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Sanjaya is saying, and he knows these basic philosophical thoughts, but he's
Mm.
saying, it's Maya te muhu muhu. I'm astonished at every moment again and again. So I
Mm-hmm.
would, so the more one is going to predict, to a predictable realm, to
Mm-hmm.
mechanism, slowly, slowly the freedom is reduced. But the more one
Mm.
is like moving towards a divine love, then the more everything at every second is surprise, is like fascination. There is a term which I like very much, is it's called taste for mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So this is only a person who has freedom can work in that realm where everything is mystery.
Mm.
And recently many times I accompany people and devotees while dying. And I
Mm-hmm.
was with one person dying. I didn't even know him. And then I asked the doctors on what he die. And they say in German it's called idiomatische neuropathie, idiomatic neuropathy. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what this means. So I looked in the dictionary and it's written of unknown cause.
Mm-hmm.
So, in this world, they have even very elaborate terminology for that they don't know, because they don't live in the taste for mystery. They have to have words very that seems as they would know it. But actually, it can be a taste for mystery at every second and every moment. And for me, this is a very natural aspect of freedom. It's like
Mm-hmm.
going prema. The more I go towards tamas, the less is the freedom.
Mm.
The more I develop towards sattva, the more freedom is developed. What to speak if I go towards divine love? In
Mm.
prema, everything is surprise at every moment, even for the Lord.
Yeah.
That's why it's so fascinating, even for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hari Bhagati Premnashra Bhava Kutilava. Divine love moves in a crooked way like a snake. No, I love that line from Rupa Goswami. They're completely unexpected, as you mentioned. No, there's total again fascination. We are back to the path of fascination. So I appreciate your this concluding note you are mentioning on freedom and how freedom is can be such freedom can be so free, so to say, that it gives place to absolute unexpectedness and absolute charm and surprise for God Himself at every
Mm,
single moment. So that's the highest level of potential of freedom. Of course, we can talk about Mahaprabhu, Krishna himself relishing Radha's bhav, and that's again surprise at every single moment. It's a bottomless ocean, and that's why the Gaur Lila has to continue forever, because he's never touching the end of his surprise experience. Like the symptoms of anuraga, as Rupa Goswami describes, that Krishna Radha and Krishna see each other, and every time they feel first time they're meeting, surprise. Who is that beautiful girl?
mm,
And Priyanarma Sakas will say, but you were with her 5 minutes ago. No, no, no. I don't know who she is. I'm seeing her for the first time. So it's difficult to grasp from our situation, but in the connection of our discussion, that is showing the potential of freedom, how free you can be, that everything actually turns out to be ever new at every single moment, even for God Himself. So what to speak for us? What to speak of the invitation we are called for in the land of radical freedom, no?
Mm.
Uh, and non-conformity as well, because to reach there we have to be, again, everything there is supremely free, but everything else is non-conformist, in the sense that it's always constantly non-conforming to a certain settled way of doing things, but it's non-conformist in the way that love itself, its very movement of love is non-conformist, so we're creating new patterns. It's improvising on the spot, so to say, with great genius, and everyone is adapting to that. Nobody's complaining. Nobody's like struggling for comfort zone, like, oh Krishna, you are playing the flute from so many different spots every day, just be more predictable. Nobody's demanding that. That will be the end of the spiritual world. So everyone is non-conformist in that sense. They are conforming to the unpredictable movement of love, so that's
Yeah,
non-conformity.
and
and
it
that and
has
that's
to,
yeah, sorry.
and even his sarvagyata, his all-knowing nature, has to be
Mhm.
covered, that he is able to be surprised. You know,
Mhm.
if the devotee would come and offer him something and say, I knew it already and I saw it since long time, it would not be the same. And
Yeah.
in the first chapter of Adi Lila, Krishna is even saying, I'm earnestly eager to meet Shrimati Radhika and the gopis, but sometimes kabu mile, kabu na mile, daiveragatan. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. It's like not under his control. It's under the control, the moving of the divine love. He says, daiveragatan. It's like
Mm.
the movement of destiny, that he
Mm.
himself, the absolute autocrat, feels himself dependent of that. So this is
Yeah.
really the basis for fascination.
Yeah. Yeah. God Himself acknowledging there is a limitation in omniscience, there is a limitation in omnipotence. There are certain things I cannot taste if I remain sarvagnyata, as you say. So we need a further arrangement here, so to say. No? And that's where, of course, Yoga Maya will, and the dynamics of Lila will make him mukdata, in the words of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, like bewildered, to facilitate something that cannot be experienced otherwise. So yeah, it reminds me of this Jewish quote, which is sound kind of is similar like to a koan, like this Zen koans, like a riddle. It says, try to think about a person who is omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent. What does such a person lack? And someone may think nothing because he's omnipresent, omniscient. No, no, he
Hmm.
lacks limitation. He lacks that experience. So he needs to make some arrangement to also experience that. So he can really be Rasaraj. He can be really the king of the tasters of everything. So we will say that in terms of limitation, he becomes, again, mukdata. It seems to be a limitation, but actually it's facilitating a further experience, which again, this is a paradox of reality. No, God is omniscient and omnipotent. It seems there's no place for limitation, but that creates its own limitation in itself to be omniscient and omnipotent. So to solve that, he remains omniscient and omnipotent of one layer, but on a deeper layer becomes something else, not something less. And that's how we conclude to the idea of Krishna being Akila Rasamrita Murti, being the king of rasa, basically, in order to taste everything.
Mhm.
Mm. So anyhow,
Wow.
here Bhakti Rasa is sharing God's limits in love are limitless. Mm. So yeah, that's how it works.
Mm.
So anyhow, dear Krishna Chandra, we could continue here for hours and days and weeks and eons, and that's my hope. Kirtaniya Sadahari Satatam Kirtayantamam Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, and so on. All these verses that tell us how Sadhu Sangha is about, getting together.
Katkayantaschamam nityam.
Yeah, I was thinking about that also. Chatur Sloki of the Gita. Yeah, to Shanti Cha Ramanti Cha.
Yeah.
So So that's the taste that we are having here, taste of transcendence and a portal uh, of eternity. Now we are having given a glimpse of what we are supposed to do for the rest of forever. So I'm feel very grateful, feel very blessed to have received that trailer today with you in this last hour and 45 minutes.
Wow,
But
already.
I think yeah, that's also how time passes running when we are having great time. So before concluding, I don't know, Krishna Chandra, if you have any concluding thoughts, something you like to share, some whatever comes from your heart at this precise concluding moment.
Maharaj, just a deep thought just pops up. First of all, this should be Vaishnav Sangha, that one just sits together and enlightens each other and brings up and some more point, and it's more elaborated, and one doesn't have any fear or reduction. Oh, if I say this, then I will be put in a box and restricted. So this is such a wonderful exchange. And in the very beginning of this conversation, you brought up this verse of Gita, at the end of Gita, when Krishna, as the only autocrat, as the only main teacher, as the only being that could expect anything from others, but he's not doing it. He's not using his position. And
Mm,
after teaching so long, nearly 700 verses, he's just
mm,
saying, Yatta ichasi tata kuro. Oh, Arjuna, now you choose what you want and you think deeply on it. So this is a wonderful dynamic. But now just something is coming. Krishna is really reflecting. And then he's giving Krishna like a sign. Yes, I'm ready for
mm,
this risk of freedom. I'm ready for this path of love. And just the neck, because Arjuna must have given him a little sign. Krishna, it's not
mm,
mentioned in Gita, but we
mm,
can assume. Then actually Krishna is just saying the deepest words of whole Gita. Very touching. And only then he can reveal the deeper thing. When I offered something and you reflect, and now he agreed out of his choice, and only at that
mhm,
moment he's allowed to continue speak, and he can
mhm,
reveal the deeper thing of his heart. And Krishna is saying, Shrinu me paramam vaja. Oh, Arjuna, now hear my paramam vaja. Hear
mhm,
clearly the deepest instruction, my deepest words. And he's saying, um, Ishtosi me dridhamiti. This is very touching, because in
mm,
this world we see some souls, they choose God and their Ishtadev, their most beloved Lord. But Krishna is saying, Ishtosi me dridhamiti. I choose you as my Ishtadev.
mm,
And this can only come because Arjuna made a choice. If
mhm,
otherwise, this deepest secret of his heart, he could
mhm,
not he could not share. And there is also just besides that, there is some commentaries in Bhagavatam, like in the beginning of sixth canto,
mhm,
where um, Parikshit asks, how can a soul be protected from really deep suffering? And then Shukadev Goswami gives like wrong answers. He says, oh,
yeah,
by punya, by
karma, yeah,
yes, you should just be pious in this world. And Parikshit says, no, I cannot believe that. For me, this is useless. And then he
mhm,
says, okay, you just, do some prayaschita,
mhm,
do some little
yeah,
penance. I said, no, this is useless. And then Vishwanacharya Thakur is commenting, if Parikshit would not have disagreed by using his freedom in a spirit of openness,
mm,
Shukadev Swami would not have continued speaking. So, and this is what we experience at the end of Gita.
Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
because Arjuna really made the choice, then Krishna can say this Paramavaja, this deepest word, oh Arjuna, oh
Yeah.
soul, I choose you as my Ishtadev.
Yeah. Or like at the very end, as we were talking in Switzerland, the very end of the 9th canto, when Parikshit asked Sukadev, "Can you tell me about Krishna's Leela?" And Sukadev replies in 2 verses. And if Parikshit wouldn't have used his freedom to disagree with that and say, "Please speak more in detail," we wouldn't have 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. So yeah, we can see the value of freedom presented in this particular context for further revelation, for further inquiry. Or the same with Ramananda Sambat. No, Mahaprabhu asking Ramananda, "Tell me something." He says something, Mahaprabhu says, "Ego bahya age kaha ar." That's superficial. Go for augment the truth. I disagree. I'm using my freedom to disagree. And that takes us to the highest possible limit. So that's, yeah, I really appreciate what you are sharing about how the deepest secrets, the deepest jewels in the ocean can be only discovered by a use of voluntary immersion, so to say. Continue with the ocean analogy, voluntary immersion in the ocean of freedom, basically. No, so thank you so much for that, Krishna Chandra Prabhu. I really will love to conclude on this high note that you have shared with us, and very happy to be sharing with you again. Very happy to see you there in your Bhajan Kutir in the mountains there. Very beautiful place, always longing. One of my many close homes to my heart around the planet. One of the main ones. It's in the top 5. I can tell for sure. And since they mentioned Ananda Dham, I like to again share for those who have not been connected before. If someone may like to somehow connect further with Krishna Chandra Prabhu and know more about his message and teachings, here's the website of Ananda Dham. It's Ananda-Dham, DHAM.com. AnandaDham.com. So again, thank you so much for you. Thank you so much for everyone connected today. We are concluding our episode, and next Saturday we'll be meet again. This will be the last meeting probably of the whole year. Let's see, because then comes Kartik, and I will be out of social media totally and out of this podcast. And after that, I may continue a little bit with some retreat from certain dynamics while being in India, and maybe concentrating more on writing and other projects. So let's see. Maybe I may continue in December with some episodes. I'm still deciding, but probably next Saturday may be the last one from this year, at least season 1 of the Free Radical podcast. And next Saturday, which is October 21st, at the same time, which was a different one from usual, the same time as this one, 8 a.m. EDT time, I will be interviewing a dear friend of mine, Nam Rasa Prabhu, who somehow is my podcast acharya. He was one of the first one telling me to start the podcast. So we will be talking next Saturday on the topic of the heart of community life. That will be the main topic for next Saturday, which is, of course, quite connected to many things we have touched today. So see you there. Thank you so much to everyone for having connected, and thank you so much, Krishna Chandra Prabhu, for blessing us with your presence, wisdom,
Radhe, Radhe.
and heart. Jai Jai Shri Radhe.
Oh.